Hello, everybody, and welcome to Some Patches Required, a show where we attempt to educate and hopefully entertain you all on the ever-turbulent games industry. I'm one of your hosts. This is Zach.
And I am the proxy other host, Aaron.
And today we want to say a few quick things before we dive into the topic. You all know what we're probably going to say at this point, but thank you to all of the returning listeners, and thanks to all the new listeners. We appreciate and love your support. So please continue to show your love by sharing our show on all the different platforms or with friends, family, etc. We definitely appreciate that. It helps us grow. And don't forget to leave a like, a subscribe, a comment, whatever it might be. We really do appreciate those reviews. They help us get better and ultimately, help us get some visibility as well. So thanks, everybody. Just wanted to do a quick shout out to you all, which make us happy. And I guess I can't exactly say possible, but if we were getting 0 views every single time, we probably wouldn't have gotten this far. So I'll say possible as well, to a degree.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we liked the sound of our own voices that much, we'd just talk into the mirror. But yeah, no, honestly, it is super, super helpful when you do any of that stuff, as well as leaving us positive reviews on platforms where that's possible. And like we mentioned last time, we do now have a YouTube presence and whatnot, so feel free to check out some of Zach's fine thumbnail designery over there and subscribe to the channel on that one too.
Yeah, and we are trying to get active on more of our platforms as Twitter, slowly burns up in the atmosphere and falls back down like the recent missile launch or spaceship launch, not missile launch.
Yeah.
And I do realize that that's normal when you're testing rockets. I just had to make a jab at Elon. But anyway, our topic today has nothing to do with space and nothing to do with Elon Musk.
Thank God.
But it does have to do with scummery at the corporate level in the form of microtransactions, our favorite villain, arch nemesis that comes on every once in a while.
I think our arch nemesis, if Jason Schreier and the Bellular crew are the patron saints, I think our arch nemesis is probably Bobby Kotick. But or the concept of microtransactions, especially exploitative ones, and we're diving back into those murky waters today.
And the good old Bobbert might come up slightly during this episode, but for the most part, we'll be talking about Resident Evil 4 or RE4 and the microtransactions that, at this point, not the most recent news, but they did slip in post-launch. And Aaron, I think the interesting thing for me on this, and I think you agree just from our light conversations, is how well loved this game has largely been. It's gotten really good Metacritic scores. It's got overwhelmingly positive on Steam. I've heard a lot of positive feedback, not only from the Jimquisition, but also Michael, who you just mentioned from Bellular. And it's just very interesting that this game is so positively reviewed, and yet we're going to be talking a little smack today.
Yeah. So for context and anyone who either does not have an internet connection, in which case, how are you listening to this? That's wild. Please teach me your ways. Or just has their head, buried under the sand. Is it ostrich or emu, or which one buries it?
Ostrich is the stereotype.
Ostrich is the stereotype.
I believe.
Ostrich style. The Resident Evil 4 remake launched a little bit ago, and it was highly anticipated on the heels of several really successful Resident Evil games, those being 7 and Village, I want to say.
Yeah, but there were also the remakes before that.
I was going to say
2 and 3.
In tandem, they remade 2, which I played all the way through twice, actually, even though, like I said, I'm a very small child, and the games does spook me a little bit every now and again. And it was a great remake and everyone seemed to love it. Then they released the 3 remake and everyone seemed to love it. And then they released the 4 remake and everyone seemed to love it. And 4 was the one that everyone was kind of worried about because it's so distinct in its style and its mechanics. And it's a legend of a game, 100% through and through. And this remake came out and quashed everybody's fears to the point where I'd seen headlines hailing it as the best video game remake ever. And then Capcom did a little sneaky, and in an update, had kind of snuck microtransactions in there post-launch by a good couple weeks.
Yep, and for context, when we're talking about microtransactions, just doing a quick look at the Steam page, you'll see a few different things. Some of those include skins for the characters in the game. I think some of them might be like retro skins. So, cosmetics. I think those were maybe in the game since launch, but the only way to get them was to, purchase them from the Steam page. When we're talking about microtransactions in this context, we are referring to these wonderful tickets that you get in the game that get you the final upgrade for any of the weapons in the game. And I'm a little bit confused, Aaron, I'm not going to lie, about what I've been told about the upgrade tickets in terms of whether they immediately upgrade your gun or if they just make that last upgrade easier. But the whole point of it is that there are these tickets that cost a ton of this in-game currency that is very hard to grind out, and it's for the final upgrade, and it makes the game a lot easier by providing buffs and just general damage increases for a lot of the weapons. So the point is that a lot of people are kind of saying, that this is a pay-to-win microtransaction in a single-player game. And as we said, obviously it wasn't in there at launch.
Yeah. So for context and anyone who hasn't actually played the game, Resident Evil 4 is built on a pretty tight, it was actually said very well by Michael from Bellular, resource economy, where your ammo is very important, the things you collect are very important, your inventory space is very important, and the main way that you progress through the game is through combat. And so as you purchase weapons from the, is it just the merchant? Is that what they call him? The vendor?
I believe you buy the upgrades from him. He's the merchant.
But he's the one who's like, what are you buying, stranger? And in the original game, as you progress through, depending on how thoroughly you explore the environment, you can find stuff that you can sell over to him and then purchase new guns and then upgrade the guns. And it all happens organically, and it's fairly simple and straightforward. So even if you reach the end of the game without getting all of the upgrades, it's mostly just because you didn't spend enough time engaging with the game's actual content. The remake kind of changed that to a certain degree by introducing these side quests in a second form of currency. Spinels, I think, is how it's supposed to be pronounced. And then you can use those to upgrade your weapons. But these microtransactions basically allow you to purchase the tickets, like Zach said, and just automatically upgrade using them, is my understanding. It doesn't increase your drop rate for the other currency. It's just automatic upgrade tokens, essentially. So the concern there is that it unbalances the game's natural progression, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But my understanding of it is that they automatically upgrade. I don't think they automatically upgrade to the final upgrade, but you can use them from the jump to max out whatever weapons you have, so long as you have the cash to spend. The real world actual cash.
Yeah, I think they're like $3 or something like that, which I don't say that necessarily to downplay the cost, but we'll get into that more later as well. And I think that now my question, Aaron, to you, because I have my own thoughts or assumptions, but my question to you is, why do you think they waited until whatever it was, 2 or 3 weeks after the game had launched and received a lot of positive press to put these wonderful microtransactions into the game?
Oh, yes, these wonderful microtransactions. Well, I think there are a good couple of reasons why they might have done this. The very, 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 very unrealistically generous option is that the feature simply hadn't been finished yet, and they needed to wait in order for it to be implemented effectively. The also similarly unrealistic expectation idea of it is that they had fan feedback and implemented it very quickly. I do not believe either of those are actually the case. The most likely reason that they would have kind of sneakily introduced these microtransactions is that there are a lot of people, I think to some degree ourselves included, who absolutely abhor microtransactions in any way, shape, or form. And so keeping them out of the review copies and initial launch copies means that their reception was going to be better, because any review of the game would probably have included some mention of the fact that microtransactions were a component of this single player game, which has historically been something that if you're going to pay for DLC, it's going to be for, an expansion or additional content or something like that. Whereas in this case, it's clearly not that. And to some people, that is grounds for boycotting the game. To a lot of reviewers, it at least needs to be mentioned, which may lead to people either not wanting to buy the game because they're worried about, balance shifting if there's something like this. And if you keep those out of those copies at launch, you get a flood of great press, and then slide them in later after the reviews are already published and the Metascore is locked in. That seems to be the most likely scenario in this case, much to my chagrin. And I'm going to say, if that is the reason for it, it's pretty gross. It's pretty gross.
Yeah. I think the one thing I'll say real quick that I thought was interesting is, having conversations internally about Metacritic score, it really does matter to developers. Yes. I think there was a time period where I kind of just was like, do they really care? Because it's really the viewers that would be the ones driving, the traffic, right? Similar to like movie scores and how you were saying like, I think the D&D movie is going to be bad. And I was like, well, I think that it'll be reviewed poorly, but I think that the audience score will be really good. I think in films, you can get away with having some like campier movies that are, maybe not reviewed particularly well by critics, but, people love them and they'll flock to see it. I don't know that that's the same in games. And that seems to be the emphasis for a lot of studios based on internal conversations I've had. But outside of that, to your point, I definitely think that chasing those higher review scores is a primary reason for why a lot of publishers do this. I wonder too, after what you just said, Aaron, if it got them out of a lot of the boycott drama, because the drama right now around it, there's some people talking about it, but for the most part, it's not super crazy. Yeah. And I bet the reason that it isn't bad is because a lot of people feel that these microtransactions are kind of just a la carte. They don't really impact the gameplay experience for like 99% of people, 95%. My point being, like, the game feels good to a lot of people. And I think that if Capcom would have said, hey, we're going to have microtransactions in this game, and then no one had played it, people would have been like, oh God, let's overanalyze this and everything. And, it would cause all this drama and all these issues. If they just wait until later and then add them, not only does it help them with their review score and, people buying day one, but it probably gets them around that boycott drama.
It circumvents the controversy in actually what I hate to say is like a hatefully clever way, because pre-release drama is a lot more impactful on sales and scores, and it is true, Metacritic scores actually really do matter to especially publishers and developers. I've read a fair number of times that a lot of post-release like employee bonuses are tied to whether or not a game hits a certain Metacritic score, which is kind of wild. And if it doesn't hit that, it could potentially lead to layoffs. It could potentially lead to people not getting bonuses. it could, lead to a lot of stuff, and things can spiral very quickly if you haven't already proven that it's a decent game. And that's one of the things that's really hard to wrap your head around within this particular context. And we'll get to that in just one sec, but it is absolutely fascinating to kind of try and trace the thought process, but logically it makes sense, and it's not the only example of companies attempting to do this sort of thing. Zach, you had actually pulled up 2 additional ones, just 2 to keep it brief.
Well, it's kind of fortunate that I don't think there's that many examples of microtransactions getting pulled into games, but 2 examples, and one of them you might be surprised by the publisher behind it, but one of them, unsurprisingly, is Activision with Crash Team Racing. Crash Team Racing, it boasted not having microtransactions, and for those that don't know what that is, it's kind of like a Mario Kart, but with Crash Bandicoot characters. But they boasted that they would not have microtransactions in the game. It released without microtransactions, and then they got added, I think, about 2 to 4 weeks later. And a lot of the one article I read was kind of funny because it was like, I was surprised, but I shouldn't have been surprised because it's Activision.
The writer of that particular article, it was an article published on Destructoid by Christopher Hovermeyer, and they said, like, I so thoroughly distrust Activision Blizzard as a publisher that there's no way I shouldn't have seen this coming, and I think that's just kind of funny and why I like Destructoid. But it's totally true. Yeah, they'd had interviews with developers saying that there wouldn't be microtransactions in the game. It was more or less a selling point of it being a single player experience with no microtransactions and whatnot. Well, not single player, it's obviously a racing game, but like a standalone situation, no microtransactions, no worries. The game itself will just be the game. There's no reason to rebalance anything. There's no microtransactions. And to their credit, the writer did give the benefit of the doubt to the developers who'd said that, but they did introduce those microtransactions anyway, which, again, surprising nobody, but unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I want to make a statement before I get on to the I guess, third game, including Resident Evil, to have done this that aren't from Capcom, is if it wasn't clear, we think it's bad to add microtransactions after the game launches. I don't know why, again, I'm having trouble talking today, but yeah, it's not cool. It is kind of disingenuous. It's definitely anti-consumer. That's actually a thing that Destructoid goes into in that Crash Team Racing game. Something that the Jimquisition episode gets into very specifically about how, like you said, Aaron, some people very much don't want to play games with microtransactions in it. A lot of reviewers want to score a game lower if it's got microtransactions, depending on how egregious those microtransactions are. And so before we keep trucking ahead, I just want to make sure that we make that point.
Yeah, for sure. But then to roll into the third one, we've got Gran Turismo, I want to say 7. Gran Turismo.
You know what? I didn't put the number.
Yeah, it was.
I just realized.
No, you're good. I wasn't even looking at that. I was just tapping back to my own personal links. Gran Turismo 7 added microtransactions, and this is fascinating for 2 reasons. One of which will lead into my next kind of point, which will loop back to the Resident Evil 4 remake. The first one is it added microtransactions sneakily. This is a Sony game. Not traditionally known for doing stuff like that is Sony. And it was a little bit of a surprise to a lot of people. And it ended up resulting in so much backlash that it became, at least at the time, which was, last year, the lowest user-rated reviewed Sony game ever on Metacritic. Because of the introduction of these microtransactions. That so intense is the backlash that Gran Turismo 7 originally kind of heralded also as a very good game, a really, really solid game, it became the worst user reviewed game on Sony's slate ever. And I think that's kind of wild. And in this article, which was written by Kyle Grattan? Yeah, Grattan. Fancy. The main complaint seemed to be that the game is so poorly balanced such that it drives you into these pay to win sort of microtransactions. And you now get to look at the game in a new context and say, well, these were probably supposed to have been baked in all along, because your trickle-fed currency, which you can use to buy cars, you can use to upgrade your cars, and obviously, perform better in various different events and whatnot. But you are literally trickle-fed that currency, more or less as a kind of a freemium sort of experience, where if you play any game on your cell phone, you're probably familiar with that. The first couple of levels are very easy, but then, oh man, you need to, recharge your life crystals in order to play another round, and it costs 5 per. That sort of thing. Or, man, it would really help me if I spent $3 on this gem pack so that I can upgrade this one thing and get past this tough level. That seems to have been baked into the Gran Turismo 7 situation. And the fact that...
Well, to clarify, it's not time gated.
No,
like
it's not
that,
time gated like
you're
that.
You're just drip fed currency.
Yeah, but you're trickle fed the currency,
yeah.
And it has a similar effect where its mechanics designed to filter you towards extra purchases. That makes more sense in a free to play game. It makes very little sense in a game that's priced $70 at on a PS5. That
well, here's an interesting thing, Aaron, too, is that that's a Sony game, Microsoft's game. Forza, I'm playing Forza Horizons 5, and they throw vehicles at you.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
it
is not hard to get a ton of vehicles and then upgrade them, and they throw currency at you. And yeah, there's some packs that have good cars in them, but, like, you can circumvent it so easily that, like, it's just funny because these two games are direct competitors, and not to shit on Microsoft, but, like, Sony has this image. If you were to stereotypically look at both of them, you'd be like, well, probably Forza has more microtransactions than a Sony game. And then you're just completely wrong.
Yeah.
I literally played some Forza last night. It's just really funny.
Yeah, it is. It's a
distinction.
It is a weird thing. And those of you who've listened before will probably recognize the Sony bias on my side and the Microsoft bias on Zach's. But, yeah, no, it's you call the bullshit where you see it. Sorry for using a dirty word, but you call the bullshit where you see it, and this is some bullshit because by at least this account and by many others, the game was built, again, not with like the time gating and everything, but it was built to drive you, if you'll pardon the pun, towards those microtransactions that basically give you a progress boost. And there are a bunch of games that have that already built in at the beginning, right? So I can point to the most obvious example that comes to mind is something like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which had these XP boosts. Because a lot of people had actually complained that Assassin's Creed Odyssey felt, let's say, unnecessarily grindy, and then saw those XP boosts and went, okay, they restructured the game's progression in order to draw me towards purchasing a way to play the game at a normal balance. I personally didn't have that issue when I played Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I never paid for any of the XP boosts, and I never really had a problem progressing through the game. But again, there's a level of subjectivity to what is balance and what is easy, what is hard. I've never beaten Bloodborne. Some people can beat it using pizza as controllers. Like it's a whole knotted mess of things there. But yeah, they more or less obviously baked a microtransaction driven experience into their game, but didn't include the microtransactions until well after the fact. And that is almost certainly because they were worried about the actual backlash that they did end up getting.
And to bring it back to RE4 for just a minute, there's not a ton to dig in on the RE4 side, but I think to your point about both Gran Turismo and Assassin's Creed Odyssey, having these microtransactions brought into the game, as you know, Bellular was talking about kind of briefly, does beg the question of, is this the optimized balance for the game? Or is the game trying to push you towards making a purchase of microtransactions?
You read my mind. That is exactly where I was going.
No. Well, and like we both said too at the beginning, like a lot of people I think seem to suggest that the balance is mostly fine. I know that the Jimquisition episode said that they thought some of the prices for that final ticket, which you can buy with real money, was a little bit egregious when it came to Spindles. The verdict is out on how you actually pronounce that.
Spinals.
But Spinals.
This is Spinal Tap.
I mean, it could very well be. It is a Resident Evil game, and it's weird. But yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of like the weird, uncomfortable thing, Aaron, is there some insidious attempt to get us to go towards those microtransactions? Is there not? What I will say just real quick before I let you interject, though, is that I did have a friend, and if they listen, they'll know who they are, but I did have a friend that bought a ticket, because they didn't want to have to grind in the game. I don't even know that they did some grinding. I would argue that there is a little bit of pushing. If there is a perception that there's going to be a lot of grinding for something, the game is by default pushing certain people that have a certain inclination to not want to waste time or, da-di-da-di-da, to spend money. But anyway, that's kind of my quick note on that. What are your thoughts?
You've opened a can of worms here, my friend. And the thing that I keep coming back to is, I haven't played the game, the Resident Evil 4 remake. I have played the Switch port, I think, of the HD remaster based off of the GameCube version, probably. But the entire purpose of the game is this really tight resource management sort of thing. It's evident in the aiming mechanic, which I think was changed in the new one, and for good reasons, because it was fairly janky, but it was also very purposeful in the original, where you need to land your shots, otherwise you're gonna run out of ammo. You need to judiciously pick the moments to heal. You need to decide, am I just gonna combine 2 green herbs? It's all very tightly designed to keep you just maybe 10% less equipped than you want to be. And that is a purposeful design decision. So if that is maintained in the remake, then I actually think maybe by modern sensibilities that could be perceived as pushing. But I think if it's just that same level of balance, then no. But if it is, heightened to the point where you do need to grind harder rather than just explore in order to get the gem to slot into the bracelet to sell it to the vendor for more money, then there's definitely design tweaks that could have been made in order to push you towards wanting to buy that stuff. But the original game, it's kind of like Breath of the Wild, in this sense that they purposefully designed it such that there were only so many spirit orbs that you could fully upgrade only one. Even if you completed every single shrine, you could only fully upgrade either your stamina or your heart capacity. You could not get both fully upgraded. If they were to sell something that would let you finish that, would that be a problem? I don't know for sure. But in this particular sense, I can't speak to the game itself as being different, and it's one of those things that I find fascinating because it's so incredibly subjective, where on one hand, Michael from Bellular, please tweet at Zak first, second, had mentioned that he didn't really see any problems with the balance in the game and hasn't purchased anything, in order to XP boost, basically, and skip over to it. And then the Gymquisition video had a vastly different thing, where they had even said they felt like it was unnecessarily grindy. So we have very conflicting opinions on whether or not this is a designed idea. And I will launch into one of my major points very quickly, which is to say that it kind of feels like, supposing the game was launched at its actual optimal design, it was balanced and released in a complete state with no need for these tickets and whatnot, and then they decided to sell them. There are problems with that, but it feels less shitty in some ways than redesigning the game in order to push you towards additional purchases for a game that's going to cost you $60 or $70. And to me, it almost feels like paying to unlock easy mode, or it's paying to unlock power fantasy mode, where, you know, there are people like me who love games, love playing games, like a challenge, but sometimes you just want to play the game and you don't want to be stuck on a mission for a million years, and making it easier isn't necessarily a terrible thing. And if you're willing to pay for that, the market idea in that situation would be, yeah, I mean, you can just buy your way through that checkpoint. And if you're willing to pay for that, then there shouldn't be a problem with it, theoretically.
Well,
but then we get to the other bits. Yes.
Well, basically what these are in a lot of ways are framed as time saver mechanics. Yeah. You exemplified it when you talked about Assassin's Creed Odyssey. That's the biggest red flag for that.
Yeah.
For a lot of people.
Not
like
a black
you said,
flag?
It didn't necessarily impact you, but not black flag. No, unfortunately not. You know, and I think that universally they're seen as kind of scams, sort of. But I have to say, I kind of agree, because you shouldn't have to pay extra money for an easier difficulty mode.
Yeah.
Especially when on Steam and on a lot of different PC platforms, you can just mod a game for free, and it can break it largely. And I think the idea that, you know, I just don't know. I don't think there's clearly something going on here where people think it's okay to expect to have to pay for a better experience. And I think that's only frustrating when you really get into it, because they're the ones that made the experience. If they wanted it to be easier to help people get through it, then they should have put it in the game by default. And then you can have a discussion of like, well, did they have the time to do the tuning and all of that? Because admittedly, that does take time to do the balance. Well, if they didn't have time to do it, maybe they should just make it free with like a cheat code or something to unlock these things instead of monetizing it. So it's still that whole thing of like, they're selling people a solution to a problem that they created. And I will go one step further and just quickly touch on the point of like, there's a lot of negativity towards people that buy these microtransactions, I think, and saying like, oh, these microtransactions are fine because if someone wants to pay to ruin their own fun, you know, that's fine. But the important thing that I do think that the Gymquisition does really well is they really do a great job of hitting at the fact that some people have impulse control issues, and those are often driven by biological things that person can't control. And obviously, I think all kinds of business, in a sense, is preying on people's biology and, you know, psychology, etc. But it just does seem a little insidious to kind of manipulate people to any degree. But what I will say, to your initial point, are these the most egregious microtransactions in the world? Absolutely not. There are much worse ones, i.e. loot boxes, i.e. FIFA Ultimate Team, yada, yada, yada. And I think that's actually the interesting thing. You know, the Gymquisition even says that. Michael from Bellular even says that. to your point, Aaron, these aren't the worst microtransactions that you can have, but I definitely still think that they suck because you shouldn't have to pay to experience a game better when people can just mod it for free.
Yeah, well, I mean, the scale on that, everything in this conversation is a sliding scale, in my opinion, because I don't think there's an actual absolute in this, except for don't add them after launch. But in this situation, to me, the sliding scale of morality hits a really hard point when it comes to, did you purposefully manipulate the game's original design in order to push me towards purchasing this? Because, again, that's what you see with a lot of free-to-play games, is they will purposefully design it in such a way that you more or less, if you want to progress and continue progressing, you more or less have to pay into the game. And don't get me wrong, developers should be paid. Even publishers, who are often the people behind a lot of these things, should be paid. They don't need, but if you are already paying $70 for an experience and you change that experience 15 degrees to really guide either a majority or maybe a plurality of the players in that situation to purchase something to optimize their experience, that is just scummy. And I'm not sure if that's what they did, but if it is what they did, then it's extremely scummy, which is where we get to, again, if the game is optimized, this is actually the big question for me, if the game is optimized correctly, and then you just add these things to make it easier for people, is that, smart business and harmless, or is it literally a scam? Because you're having someone pay for something that you also could have just baked that easy mode in, and just said, screw it, whatever, they already paid $70 for the game, we'll just give them the Power Fantasy mode for free and let that roll. Or no, wait, we can maybe charge them for it, and we'll just snip that bit out too. Either way, the sliding it in after the fact is maybe the grossest part of it, because there's no way that reads well unless it's literally they had people clamoring to ask for it.
And as far as we're aware, that wasn't a thing. Yeah.
It seems like the backlash to it has been such that if those people were there before, they've suddenly gone very quiet.
Yeah. No, and I think to your point, the question for, why we dove into this specific thing is definitely like, it's just hard to trust people that the game is 100% balanced when you add these microtransactions to make it easier. That kind of suggests that there may have been some finagling, at least with currency amounts.
Yeah.
To encourage people to spend
I always get
real life money.
I always get really jittery when I see multiple forms of currency in a game. It doesn't even matter what kind of game it is. If you don't have one like sort of major codified currency, I'm immediately like, that's going to be weird. Okay, like obviously there's differences. Again, back to Breath of the Wild, you've got spirit orbs. That's technically a form of currency. 4 of them either gets you stamina or heart upgrades, and then you have money and whatnot. But the situation where you're like, okay, well, I can redeem so many gems for tickets, and the tickets can be turned into cromples, and the cromples can be redeemed for scrimbles, and it's like, okay, it's starting to feel like my offline single player game is becoming a live service game at this point. And if I wanted to play Genshin Impact, I just go back and play Genshin Impact. If I wanted to play Resident Evil 4, I'd like to purchase the game. If you update it to fix some stuff because it went gold, you press the discs and then you did bug fixes in the background, that's one thing. If you want to give me new content and ask me to pay for it, that's a completely different thing. But You added this extra form of currency already to the game. That was baked in from launch. To me, that is slightly indicative of a model where they were kind of expecting people to want to pay to accelerate their progress. So just put it in the game in the beginning if you're going to do it. I mean, first off, don't do it. But if you have to, be honest about it. It's the duplicity of it that I think is the most upsetting.
I do also like that all of the currencies you initially listed out all sounded like they were from Rick and Morty.
Oh, yeah?
So I think you might have a future as a writer.
Well,
on,
hey,
either that or solar opposites. So I don't know.
I was gonna say if I can tighten up my Rick and or Morty impressions, I might have a future as a voice actor.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Florpadorp, Scooperloop, whatever. They use a lot of those weird fucking names. Yeah, no, I think we're on the same page there, for sure. And what was I gonna say? There was one other note.
I had one final note on that last bit. If you were gonna move to another one.
Oh yeah, no.
I was gonna say there are two mini things in there. One is, and again, I'm treading delicate waters here because you'd already mentioned the impulse control issues thing, and the Jimquisition had mentioned that a lot of the time these are designed to play on people who are neurodivergent, and if you're looking to make money based on someone's personal condition, not just mindset is a completely different thing. We're talking about biological issues. If you are actually trying to prey on that for something that's actually unnecessary, then fuck you. Bar none. If you designed a well-balanced game and then decide to sell easy mode just in the hopes that somebody with a particular condition might be driven to purchase your easy mode, then you should hire somebody who knows how to do accessibility in games, because it's not the same thing. The difference between having a good game experience and not having a good game experience shouldn't be $15. And if you're someone who, you know, is impulsively going to do that, then you shouldn't need to worry about a large corporate monolith, you know, trying to take advantage of you. And two, I will say that I would actually, my opinion on this has actually shifted fairly substantially as I ran through it, because I originally fell into the, fuck it. Like, I'm not good at games. I might have bought that, you know, like I played Resident Evil 4. It might be nice to have it be a little easier sometimes. If I just kind of wanted the feel of the game and it was, you know, late at night and I just got off of work and I just want to sit down and play good old Resident Evil 4, enjoy some of that classic camp. You know, I'd be like, okay, well, $10 is $10. I bought the game for $15 on sale, and yeah, you know, I'll throw a couple of bucks at it. It'll go to the developers. That'll make me feel good, and then I won't have to fight the fucking chainsaw man. I know that's a really early one, but I won't have to fight this like terrible boss 75 times and get frustrated, because I'll just be overpowered, and that'll make me feel fine. I almost fell into just saying, if you have that mindset, then buy it. It's harmless. But it does start to feel exploitative, and if they just done it from the jump, it wouldn't have been an issue. I don't think. If they had, you know, rock solid proof that they had actually balanced the game correctly. But, you know, at the same time, it's impossible to ignore the fact that you don't have to charge for that when you're charging $70 for a remake of a game that's 20 years old. Anyway. Yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to admit my own bias on that.
Well, I mean, that's all good. I think ultimately what I've been trying to dig into is that I think just some of the, like, microtransaction logic is interesting. I think ultimately the Resident Evil situation just gets us into the front door of the conversation. As we've kind of said, it really doesn't seem like Resident Evil is a bad game. We wouldn't be talking about it if it had released with microtransactions, probably. Maybe we would have, but probably we wouldn't have. Especially with these microtransactions, they're not egregious enough that I think it would have gotten a massive amount of attention, but maybe it would have. I don't know. Yeah, I think really just the final thing that I wanna leave on is related sort of to what you were talking about, Aaron. But it's the one point that on the Gymquisition was brought up towards the end about microtransactions either being a scam because they're so useless and worthless that you're basically making people buy something that they could easily get, in which case you are kind of, selling someone dirt that they got outside your house for $5 when you could just go outside and get it.
I got
right?
you. I got you this flower. Where'd you get it?
Your front yard.
Yeah. Now love me and pay me for it. That'll be $10.
Yeah, exactly. So it's, microtransactions are either like that or they're more like the Gran Turismo ones where it's like they make it useful and have value because they they develop the game to make it difficult to get that thing. Or maybe you can't even get it and that's why it's useful. But anyway, I just think that was a really interesting thing that got brought up. And I'm not even saying this to like crucify Capcom or the Resident Evil development team. I just do think it's interesting because as an example, Devil May Cry, which is another Capcom game, whatever the most recent one was, apparently had some like massive red orb purchase that you could make. I don't know what the dollar amount on it was, but it was, you could get like 100,000 red orbs. So you could upgrade your character all the way. But apparently the red orbs drop like crazy. So, it definitely takes some farming. It's definitely quicker to use your wallet. But like, if they drop so quickly, is Capcom in that case just selling you dirt? Like, are they scamming you because you really shouldn't, because you look at that, it's like, oh, it's 100,000. That's a ton. Oh, I don't know. Like, that's definitely manipulative. Like, there definitely is a bit of an issue there.
Yeah, for sure.
And is it pay to win? Yeah. Is pay to win as big of a deal in a single player game? No, but like, it is, I just think all these are a little bit scummy. It's just so much more cut and dry. This will be my last thing because I know you wanted to comment, but this will be my last thing. It was so much more simple when all microtransactions were just transactions that were called DLC, that were map packs, that were expansions, where there was a indisputable fact that effort went into the content that you were buying. And it wasn't, oh, were there all these mind games, etc. It wasn't like that. It was just simple. It was another product that extended your life time of playing, X game. And that's what I find really frustrating. Like, even with cosmetic items, I can justify to a degree those purchases because artists took time to develop that. It's clear what the product is. But some of these other currency things, it's just like, yeah, that's it. That's the answer.
You're completely right. And it was actually that argument that had me kind of shift my perspective on it, because initially, like I said, I really was in the, fuck it. It's a little shady that they released it after launch, and it raises some questions about why they would have done that. But if the game's well balanced, then if someone wants to pay for it, I can't blame a business for wanting to capitalize on someone else's impatience. And then I went, wait, actually, oh goodness me, maybe I am Rick and Morty. It was like, actually, no, that is pretty bad, both for like designers of games, people who want to create, what by all accounts, should be a work of art, whether that be through combat mechanics or story or, traversal or whatnot. It kind of devalues their work. It forces them to create something imperfect in order to solve the problem by not getting nearly enough money for themselves, but making a lot of money for executives and publishers. Yeah, that was the argument that shifted my perspective on that one in the direction of, Nah, I mean, it's not egregious, but it's pretty scummy. And that's actually one of the really interesting things about this particular topic is that the sin, if there is one, is minimal, but its impact and what it says on a macro level is fairly substantial. And you can't, I think it does, even if it's not 100% guaranteed that the game was designed, any of these games were designed around this, the number of ones that clearly are, and the fact that it's being implemented into ones that are potentially designed to draw you towards those, erodes your trust to the point where you can't trust anybody in these situations. So you do have to wonder. You have to wonder whether this was a decision made based on slightly scammy, I'm going to sell you the dirt out of my front yard, or out of your front yard rather, or whether it's, well, we delicately tweaked a legendary game in order to make it more purchasable after you've already purchased it. It's again, it's kind of, it's a little bit of digging to get to the meat of this one, but there's no solid answers, but I think we can all mostly agree that is a bad move, generally speaking, because like you said, Zach, yeah, it's questionable.
Well, it's like what we saw with, and I think this is, we're getting to a point where I can start making some form of kind of closing time statements. Closing time. Anyway, but God, I hate that plays everywhere.
It does.
It's really strange.
Well, at least hopefully the artist is getting royalties.
I doubt it, but maybe. Little did they know that their song would be famous as a meme across the at least United States for that. But I think in maybe not closing, but close to, I think to your point that you just made, it's important that if things like RE4 adding microtransactions don't make some kind of a negative splash, we do have the possibility of games becoming worse after release because, all these microtransactions get added that were always supposed to be in there, but weren't. And so you've got this imbalanced game that's really weird, and then we learn later on that that's because they're adding microtransactions, but they wanted to avoid a negative score or whatever it is, right? Whatever reason that they weren't in there at launch, they get added in later, and da-da-da-da-da. I think that's really the situation that you have to consider whenever you look at the games industry, because as much as I love the games industry, the reality is that it is profit-driven. If doing this, and by this I mean adding microtransactions post-launch, makes games more profitable, gets them a higher review score, companies will do it. If they see Capcom doing it successfully, it doesn't matter what the intricacies of, Capcom doing it in a less bad way are. Dumb companies are going to look at that and be like, oh, we can do that and be successful too. And then we end up in a situation like where we are now where, things used to be DLC, they used to be expansions. Now everything's microtransactions, basically. And there are obviously some expansions and blah, da, 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 da. But I think that's the real risk, is that I think, Aaron, you and I have admitted that of all the things Capcom could have done, and I say Capcom because it's the publisher that's probably pushing these changes, not the developers, more than likely. Hashtag see our last episode for more. I think that they may not be doing it as badly, but someone's going to come around and see the benefits of being scummy like this, and then they're going to start doing it, a la Activision or, I don't know, Konami, even though they just make pachinko machines at this point.
Yeah, basically.
2K, I don't know, some scummy
Yeah,
thing.
I keep going back to, because I'm thinking about, because I haven't played the Resident Evil 4 remake, and now I kind of really want to. But playing through that first game, and I'm trying to think of tactile experiences I've had with games, because I think the experience of playing a game is the most effective lens through which to look at it and then talk about it. So I'm going back to The Last of Us, which I have to imagine took some inspiration from mechanics introduced in various Resident Evil games, just because of its, tight resource management, survival horror, and whatnot. And I'm thinking to myself, the game is punishing enough as it is, and the resource drops are actually I'll say kind of sloppy sometimes, because you can usually tell when there's going to be an encounter, but it also encourages you to fuel up beforehand, and when you've run out of something, it's tense, and it's so well balanced that you always feel, like I said, about 10% less equipped than you'd want to be when you go into that situation. You don't quite have enough arrows. You don't have enough materials to make... You have enough materials to make maybe one silencer, or one Molotov cocktail, or one health pack. And I'm thinking, okay, there's a balance here that is so well crafted. And I'm thinking, if this sort of idea bleeds into the mainstream, which clearly it has, because we're talking about the fucking Resident Evil 4 remake and Crash Bandicoot and a couple others, it's not a far cry for me to imagine the inevitable The Last of Us Part 3 having, a successful launch, and then realizing you can just buy upgrades, and then playing through the game, even just playing through the game normally, my perspective on that would shift 50 degrees, 60 degrees. And I'd be like, well, is this harder? Even if it isn't, my perspective is now going to be, is this harder on purpose? And that's going to ruin my enjoyment of the core game. And ultimately, what you want is the core game to be satisfying. So you're right. There is this slide down effect where, legacy studios, promising upstarts, recently acquired and even, revered studios may end up adopting this if the penny pushers upstairs decide that it's the best way to make more money for their game. And that's problematic regardless of whether or not the game itself is balanced and then this is released as a paid easy mode. It's desperately problematic, and you do not want that to be the future of the games industry. At least I don't.
I think the irritating thing too, and we've kind of at this point transitioned this into like a microtransactions focus away from Resident Evil, which is perfectly fine. I think where I'm going though that's frustrating is a lot of the time I feel like these decisions are made because publishers talk with developers and they're like, we think if you add these kinds of microtransactions, you can make X more. I'm sure they've got projections on this. There's no way that they don't. If your game sells this much, this is how much we suspect that you can make on microtransactions. And then the developer probably argues back and forth with the publisher about what they will and what they won't put in the game. Ultimately, if the publisher who's funding the project says that you need to put some kind of monetization in your game, chances are, unless you have a really key player that can tell the publisher to fuck off, you're probably going to have to compromise.
Yeah.
And so what feels crappy about this whole situation is a lot of the time these microtransactions are placed in the game to target very specific people. I wouldn't go so far as to say that it targets neurodivergent people because they're neurodivergent. They may, a high proportion of them may get caught because of the tendencies that these people are trying to get, right? People that might be more impulsive or whatever. Yeah. I'm just going to go out there and say I don't really fully understand the scope of neurodivergency. I'm just repeating what the Jimquisition said. So if I'm misattributing things, I am ignorant on the topic, full disclosure. But my point here is that they're trying to get whales to spend money on their game. They're not trying to get most people to do that. But it sucks because we all get impacted and caught in the same net.
Exactly. That's what I mean. Like I'm very hesitant. If The Last of Us Part 3 releases with mechanics that are similar to the previous games, but these sort of pay-to-win additions, you know, I might just be impulsive enough to spend the money on it, and I'd feel terrible about it, and it would impact my experience. And even if I decide that I'm not going to do that, it's still going to impact my experience, because if they've rebalanced the game in order to account for it, but I didn't know that when I went in and purchased it, I think that's a pretty significant problem.
Yep.
So, I mean, Resident Evil 4,
I agree.
I will probably play Resident Evil 4 on my PS5. I will wait until it is a little bit less than $70, buy a used copy, and I'll probably enjoy the game a great deal without spending an additional extra dollar. But it is a very like niche issue that says a lot about the direction that, I mean, to be honest with you, it says a lot about the direction that internet connection has taken us in. Because this would not have been an issue if it was released on a cartridge during the NES era. You know, it is entirely the fact that developers can tweak their games, which on some level is great, and on some level means that they can potentially try and sell you something that they normally would have baked in for free or just not put in at all.
That brings up a really interesting thing of like, what if you could just retain the patch that you were on for a game? Like I like this version of the game. I want to stay on this version of the game because, you know, obviously there is some bug fixing, but a lot of day one after the day one patch, a lot of games tend to be pretty stable. So it'd be funny if you had like version control on your end and you're like, yeah, no, I don't want to play the version of the game where they add the microtransactions or all the stuff that breaks the game.
It even brings up the question is, did they rebalance the game after they added the microtransactions? We don't know 100% right now. Like, it's not like that's going to be in the patch notes.
I think we doubt it, to clarify to everyone. We're not trying to start a conspiracy theory. No, it's more Aaron's idea that, like he said, you never know. There's always like a boogeyman behind the wall that's like, it could have been better. We don't know. Why are these microtransactions in the game?
I am fully not endorsing this as a conspiracy theory. This is a bad conspiracy theory, and most of them are awful. But I'm just saying there is a level of distance between the thought process that goes on in an office in Los Angeles or San Francisco or Austin or Seattle or Japan or, you know, any particular, you know, place. I realize I just named a bunch of cities in America in one country, but that is beside the point.
Japan, the famous city.
Famous city, Japan. The fact of the matter is we just don't know what goes on behind the scenes, and it's just this level of like kind of sneakiness is just a little bit it erodes your confidence in the fact that they actually care what the baseline experience is, because if money is the ultimate goal, then your experience is the wallet, right? Like, well, you know, that's more or less where I come down on it at this point. But I think we've kind of beat a dead horse at this point. Again, it's such a small little thing, and on surface level, it does not seem like it would be a particularly big issue. And on some level, it may not be. This may all be unjustified speculation. Maybe it's kind of scummy regardless, but, you know, maybe one of my first two unnecessarily, unexpectedly ethical predictions was right. And they were like, oh, well, you know, we just said like, oh, you know, we'll capitalize on this just in case someone wants it. They might as well pay for it because it wasn't baked into the original experience. And it wouldn't negate the entire issue, but or it's, you know, what it probably is, and it's that they just wanted to make money off of people's impulsivity. And that should not become a trend, even though I fear it will be.
Well, the problem with that, and this is my last statement before we get to our thanks, but the problem is that the intention doesn't matter, because the industry is a bunch of sheeple, and when I say the industry, I mostly mean publishers and people that make decisions that are business makers are a bunch of sheeple. And they're going to follow whatever gets them the higher Metacritic score and a large amount of money, regardless of what Capcom's intention was. So intentionality, unfortunately, I don't think matters. It's like it's in the industry's hands at this point as a, monolith, to decide what we continue to say is bad and what we accept. Fortunately, not too many people are adding microtransactions after launch. That's not to say that it won't become a trend, but hopefully consumers get mad enough that publishers and developers are afraid to add things post-launch.
The thing is, I feel like the only way to the thing is they've built in a fail-safe with this. And this will be my last thing, and it's something to watch out for. They built in a really effective failsafe in that the people who are really excited, who are going to drive the 4 million copies sold in the first week of Resident Evil 4, are the ones who didn't know about this. And so if they build in the failsafe that, well, you don't have to know until later, all they're doing is making money off of the people who are still going to buy the game regardless. They didn't lose any of the bad press. They didn't lose any of the first day buyers. They didn't lose any of their pre-orders. It's a brilliant business strategy, which of course, generally speaking, means ethically dubious. So I think the entire thing is just like this. It's not a clean-cut story. We don't have all of the answers, but I can absolutely see this becoming more of a trend. The first person who did microtransactions didn't get in trouble, probably. But then someone saw how much money that made, and someone else followed suit, and someone else followed suit, and someone else followed suit. But when that was disclosed to us before we inserted our card into a card reader or clicked pay on whichever site it is that you're using or whatever, it was easier then, and it's harder now. Now we just don't know. It's that level of I'm blanking on the word that I'm looking for, but there is no way to know whether your game is going to change in order to balance in certain directions at this point. And it could happen while you're asleep. And it's just really hard to trust a situation like that. But if it's profitable, it will become more prevalent. And I hate to say that, but if it's profitable, it will become more prevalent. Because like you said, it's a fair amount of sheeple. And a lot of people willing to just kind of roll with it. So keep an eye out for it. They have safeguarded themselves against the backlash, but we can hopefully stop it. The only way to really stop it is to just not buy games.
Gamers rise up.
Yes.
Put your hands.
But don't not buy games, please. Buy the games that you want to play, please. But they literally have made it, if this becomes more prevalent, into a situation where if you buy a game, you don't even know what you're buying. If it's going to be doing this, and if this becomes more prevalent, I know I've used that word a lot, it will completely change the landscape. So just keep an eye out for it. And that is my final thought on the matter.
All right. Well, I think then we are good to get into our wonderful thank yous, and I shall start by saying thank you to E. Art for our wonderful album cover / logo / everything that I have said historically for what she's helped us with. She's the artist that's been wonderful. She's helped us out. You can find her on Instagram and Etsy under the same name. That is at E. Art. Make sure to check her out.
Yes, indeed. A lot of good stuff over there. Similarly, if you like to have your eyes pleased by good art, consider your ears. You don't ever think of those, do you? I'll bet not. But if you'd like to have your ears suitably serviced, um,
that makes it sound sexual.
I know. That's why I started chuckling. Do go ahead and check out Beach Girl. Beach Girl provided our phenomenal intro and outro music, and they also have a whole catalog of original music that they've written and sung on and composed and performed, and it's all fantastic. You can find that on, Bandcamp, SoundCloud, Spotify, anywhere you find fine digital music. And if you go anywhere other than Spotify, you might actually be able to toss them a couple of dollars, which I'm sure they would very much appreciate because they work hard, they do good work, and Spotify pays pennies.
Yes.
But not to us.
And not to us. We don't make anything on Spotify, so we don't even make pennies. In closing, thank you everybody for attending our wonderful show today. Hopefully you were educated and also entertained. As always, my name is Zach. I'm one of your hosts.
I'm also one of your hosts, and my name still remains Aaron.
And don't forget that there's actually 2 Nick Cage movies where he's a vampire. There's Renfield and then Vampire's Kiss. And apparently Vampire's Kiss has a lot of good memes in it, so I don't know. Maybe check it out. I haven't seen it. So I'm not your mom. Do what you want.
Yeah. I heard Renfield was bad but enjoyable. Anyway.
That sounds about right.
Well, I mean, it's got Nick Cage as a vampire. And also Nicholas Hoult. Nicholas Hoult's an American treasure. Anywho, I will now say goodbye.
Bye-bye.
What are you buying, stranger?